Okay, group, this is your second set of notes for anatomy and physiology, our introductory unit. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so as we start with this unit, or kind of get more into it, the characteristics of life, this is going to be the thing or the characteristics that all living things must possess in order to be considered living. So anything that was once living did have at one point in time all of these characteristics, but they have lost one of them at least. So our characteristics of life include growth, reproduction, responsiveness, movement, and then on the next slide is metabolism. So growth just simply means that, and as we talk about this, this is one of the things or the bullets is this can also just be at the cellular level. This does not have to mean like gross macro large scale. But for growth, this is going to be indicative that the cell size is growing and that the number of cells is increasing. Reproduction just means that either a new organism is being made or new cells are being made. Responsiveness is there is a reaction to internal or external change, aka a stimulus of some sort. So if you go to like touch a hot stove and you pull your hand away, that is responsiveness. So or respond to a stimulus. Internally, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the homeostasis portion of these notes, but internal responsiveness means that if your internal conditions start to change, that the cells inside start to change it back. Movement, it kind of goes along with that responsiveness in the macro level, but it needs to be change in position of the body or a body part, or also change movement of cells, also the change in movement of your internal organs. Metabolism is the last characteristic of life, and this just means nutrient cycling. Um, so this is where we take, or where the body takes all of the chemical reactions that are occurring inside the body and make it so that they are beneficial toward the body. So we have four branches of metabolism. We have respiration, which is the whole reason why we breathe. And hopefully you recall a little bit of respiration, cellular respiration from biology class. But respiration just means that it's the release of energy from food by using oxygen and then giving off carbon dioxide. Digestion is kind of the other part of that. So respiration and digestion work together really closely because in order to release the food or the energy from the food has to be broken down. So these two kind of work hand in hand. Then, once digestion happens, the nutrients then go into the blood, which is circulation. So, this is the movement of the cells and chemicals in the body fluids. And then, once that happens and the nutrients turn into waste, then we have excretion or excretion. So, to excrete, so to get rid of. So, those are our four branches or types of metabolism. And here we can see that on our picture, just the characteristics uh, in picture form. So we've got like our cellular respiration and our mitochondria, sensitivity, which is the response to a stimulus in some way, shape, or form. We have nutrition, excretion, reproduction. So here we have an adult dog and their baby dog. And again, reproduction doesn't necessarily mean that it's for human anatomy, a human having a baby, but it's also the reproduction of cells and then growth. Again, this can and will be at the cellular level. That's really important because, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in class, but this, it is sometimes easy to forget, like, oh, this does not mean that a female who is unable to have babies, this does not mean that she is no longer considered living. That means at the macro level, she is no longer able to reproduce or she's unable to reproduce. But at the micro level, at the cellular level, her cells are still dividing and she's still reproducing cells. This term, is it living? So these are going to be your questions on Edpuzzle. So as they pop up, go ahead and answer them. And then we're going to talk about them once you answer them. So a piece of paper Is it living? It is made from wood, and the wood at one point in time, as it was part of the tree, was living. Um, so the wood itself was living, the tree was living in which it came from. But at the current moment, that piece of paper is no longer living. The cells are not dividing. It doesn't respond to a stimulus anymore. It is not going through any of the cellular metabolic tracts. It's not doing anything that would consider it living. Water is also considered non-living. Again, it moves. It does kind of respond to a stimuli or stimulus. If you throw a rock into water, it will move. It will flow from point A to point B. But again, it's not going through those metabolic processes. It is not recycling oxygen. It's not letting out carbon dioxide. It doesn't eat anything. So water is not considered living. A hibernating bear is considered living, even though its metabolic processes, that's the part of hibernation that allows these organisms to really slow down, is they're able to slow down their metabolic processes. But it is still going through all of the processes. It is still moving. Its internal organs are moving. Its heart is still moving. It's still beating. Um, Even if it's sleeping, it is still going through the metabolic processes. So the food that it eats a bunch of right before hibernation, that food will slowly go through the metabolic processes of breaking down and releasing waste. Um, so the hibernating bear does fit the category of living, even though it's sleeping for a long time. It's still doing each characteristic of life. All right, maintenance of life. This is going to be the environmental factors to make sure that life continues. So, this is the stuff that is surrounding the living organisms that ensures that those characteristics of life can continue on. So, the first one is water, and this is going to be the very important aspect of the maintenance of life and the requirements, because the human body is 70% water. So, the water is critical for all of the metabolic processes that need to take place within the body. It creates a nice, stable environment because water doesn't get cold very easily and it also doesn't get hot very easily. It has what's called a high specific heat and high specific temperature. So it takes a lot of energy to heat it up and it takes a lot of energy being taken away to cool it down. So it provides this nice internal environment. It also is the main component of blood and the main component in cellular cytoplasm. So, because of that, that makes it the transport medium cellularly and throughout the body. And we talked a little bit about body temperature. Takes a lot to cool it down. Takes a lot to heat it up. And then those intracellular and extracellular fluids, so the internal and external fluids of the cell. Heat, however, even though the water makes it so that our body does not react quickly to heat, um, our body does have to let heat off, especially humans, because we're endothermic. So, or excuse me, exothermic, which means that we give off a lot of heat. We are able to regulate our body temperatures by ourselves. We don't rely on the sun to do that necessarily. And so that portion, we get our energy from the release of the thermal energy once the breakdown of food occurs. So that's why it's really important to eat, is because it actually produces the heat that is needed to maintain your internal environments. The last three environmental factors are pressure, food, and oxygen. Pressure is going to be important because it allows for breathing. So atmospheric pressure is the portion needed for breathing, and then hydrostatic or fluid pressure. That's what's needed for blood to move through our blood vessels, which then delivers oxygen and nutrients to our cells. Without that hydrostatic fluid, the blood would remain or it would remain stagnant. And if that were the case, then our body's cells would not be able to get the fresh oxygen and fresh nutrients needed to survive. Food is pretty self explanatory. We've already talked about it several times. That's how we get our nutrients. The food gets broken down, and then those nutrients are used to maintain the cellular functions. And then same thing with oxygen. We already talked about it, but oxygen is really important. So we need to be able to breathe in oxygen to release the energy from the food. So what happens when these maintenance of life factors, when they start getting off or getting wonky, is we have an internal process called homeostasis. So homeostasis is how our body responds to things that are getting out of hand, or they're changing too much, and it's how our body brings it back to normal. So homeostasis really kicks in when the external environment starts to change, but our internal environment, what's happening inside our bodies, that needs to remain stable. And so homeostasis is the body's way of fixing that. There are three mechanisms or three factors that play a role in homeostasis: receptors, set point, and effectors. Receptors are the part of homeostasis that like pick up the stimulus. They're detecting that something is wrong. And when the receptor detects that something is wrong, it will send a signal to the effector, or actually sends a signal to the control center first, and then that sends it to the effector, which can then fix whatever's broken. The receptor and the set point, they work really closely because the receptor's job is to make sure that the set point, which is the value, the range that the body can be in, the receptors kind of start going off as soon as that set point is determined to be too high or too low. So an example of this would be like your body temperature. So typical human body has an internal body temperature anywhere between 98 and 99 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of number we go off of is 98.6, but it can really factor anywhere within that 1 degree range. As soon as that 1 degree range starts getting off, so you drop below 98 or you go 99 and above, the receptors, they pick up like, hey, something's wrong. We're either too hot or we're too cold. And the receptors will send a signal to the control center. And then the control center will send a signal to the effectors that says, hey, we're off in some way, shape, or form. Let's get it back to normal. And the effectors are always muscles or glands. So that's kind of their job. And the muscles will either they'll start contracting or they'll relax a little bit so that they don't give off heat. And the effect of if you are too cold, the muscles will start to, or excuse me, if you're too hot, your muscles will start to relax. And then like glands, they will secrete whatever it is that they need to secrete, hormones, or like in the case of, again, you're too hot, your sweat glands will start to secrete sweat to make you cool down. But receptors detect when the set point is off, and then the effectors, they effectively return it back to normal, hopefully. Okay. So here's our kind of picture of that. So the stimulus comes in, receptors say, hey, something's off here. They send a signal to the control center, which is saying, yeah, our set point is not where it's supposed to be. The control center, which is like the brains of the operation, they send a signal to the effectors. The effectors warrant a response, and then the change is hopefully corrected. And this process can go over and over and over again. So in this picture, this is just a quick kind of non-body related example, but in this picture, we have a house fire, and then we have like our first responders down here. So in this picture, the receptor would have been whoever determined that something was off. So the fire itself would be the set point, or the part of the set point that's off. In this case, the fire, the temperature is too hot. The receptor would be whoever called 911. So let's say there is, a high school student inside this house. When the fire first starts, they detect smoke or whatever, the set point is off. The receptor is going to call the first responders and say, hey, my house is on fire. The dispatch is going to then send the effectors, which would be like the firefighters, like, okay, go fix it, go put it out. So I do want you to try this problem here. I want you to go ahead, read through it, answer the receptors, set point, and effectors. Those will be questions on Edpuzzle. And then when you're finished, we will actually go through this in class. All right, last little bit here. So those homeostatic mechanisms, again, how the body regulates. You are in homeostasis when everything's normal. When things start to get out of control, so particularly when heat, pressure, and water, nutrients, oxygen, so these bodily functions, whenever they get out of whack, that's when those homeostatic mechanisms, that's when they'll uh, jump in. So again, body temperature, that's kind of like a thermostat inside your house. And then blood pressure is a pressure sensitive situation where the muscles and the glands, they'll work together to try to increase or decrease your blood vessels, or excuse me, your blood pressure. Negative feedback, this is the most common mechanism of homeostasis. And this is when the set point either gets too high or too low. So let's say the set point is too high, the effectors are going to bring it back down. Okay. So set point gets too high, effectors bring it back down. That's why it's called negative, is because the set point and the effectors will like counteract each other. So negative feedback is where they work against each other. An example of that is you get too cold and then your body temperature increases, or you get too hot and you'll start to try to decrease your body. So they counteract each other. The effector, again, it'll go against the receptor, the detection. This right here, the negative feedback, does not mean it's bad for you. That's really important. It is a common misconception. I always have students say that negative feedback is bad, while positive feedback, which is next, that's good. They're both good for you. They're both necessary, so positive and negative feedback. But negative feedback does not mean it's bad for you. And then our last slide here is that positive feedback. So positive feedback means that the set point, or excuse me, the receptor and the effector are going to go in the same direction. So the deviation from the set point will continue to grow until something happens, which will allow it to come back down to normal. So these particular mechanisms, they're not very common because they do really go away from the set point, but they're usually very short-lived. They don't keep going forever and ever and ever. So some examples of this is blood clotting, which leads to more blood clotting, which eventually will cause the bleeding to stop and then it'll go back to normal. But the blood clots lead to more blood clots, which lead to more blood clots, which shut down the bleeding faster. Same with childbirth. The uterus, when a woman is going into when the woman is going into labor, the baby will push on the cervix, which causes the baby to shove down into the cervix more, which causes the baby to shove down into the cervix more, which causes more labor, until you have the baby. And then there's nothing pushing on the cervix anymore, and it will return to like normal state. But positive feedback just means that, again, that effector and that receptor, that they work together to build and build and build and build until finally it returns to normal. All right, so that is it for this second set of notes. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll discuss and do some activities in class. See you then.